The Valentino Procedure, Chapter 1, Entry. The GPS signal died 3 miles back, swallowed by the dense New Hampshire pines that pressed against the narrow dirt road like skeletal fingers. Darren Holt gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white in the dashboard. Glow as his headlights carved a trembling path through the darkness. Breathe. Just breathe. The familiar mantra did little to calm the flutter in his chest, that telltale warning of an incoming panic attack. He'd learned to recognize the signs, the tunnel vision, the way his breath caught in his throat like a trapped bird. Not now. Not when he was this close. His phone, propped against the windshield, recorded his approach with its red blinking eye. "Okay, guys," he whispered to his future audience, voice steadier than he felt. "It's 11:47 p.m., and I'm about 200 yards from what locals call the Valentino Clinic. For those just joining the channel, this place has been abandoned since 1992 when Dr. Robert Valentino disappeared after. A shape loomed ahead. Darren hit the brakes, heart hammering as his headlights illuminated a rusted metal gate hanging askew on broken hinges. Beyond it, barely visible through the overgrowth, stood a 2-story brick building that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Jesus. The word escaped him in a breath fogged by the sudden chill that had crept into the car. Even with the heater running, goosebumps prickled his arms. He parked 20 feet from the gate, hands shaking as he gathered his equipment, night vision camera, digital, recorder, flashlight, and the manila folder containing everything he'd learned about Dr. Robert Valentino. The anonymous email had arrived 3 weeks ago, sender unknown, containing only an address and a single line. "The truth is still bleeding." Normally, Darren would have dismissed it. His YouTube channel, Holt Investigations, had attracted its share of hoaxers and attention seekers. But something about the message nagged at him, especially after he'd researched the location. The Valentino Clinic wasn't listed in any official records. No permits, no licensing documentation, nothing. It existed in the spaces between bureaucratic cracks, which made it either the perfect hoax or something far more sinister. The gate shrieked as he pushed it open, metal grinding against metal in a sound that seemed to echo longer than it should. The path beyond was cracked concrete, weeds pushing through like broken bones. Motion-activated security lights should have flicked on. Most abandoned places kept at least basic systems, running to deter vandals, but the darkness remained absolute, except for his flashlight beam. As he approached the building, details emerged from the black. The brick facade was intact but stained with decades of weather and neglect. Windows on the first floor were boarded up with plywood that had warped and split. But the second-floor windows... Darren stopped, raising his camera. Through the viewfinder's green-tinted night vision, he could see that several second-floor windows were unobstructed, and behind one of them, impossibly, a faint light flickered. "You seeing this?" he whispered to the camera. "There's definitely power running to this place, which means someone's been maintaining it, or..." He didn't finish the thought. In his 3 years of urban exploration, he'd learned that sometimes the most logical explanations were the most terrifying. The front entrance was a set of glass double doors beneath a concrete overhang. A metal placard beside them read "Private Practice," by appointment only in letters so faded they were barely legible. Darren tried the handles, expecting resistance, but the doors opened with a soft hydraulic whisper that made his breath catch. The lobby beyond was preserved like a time capsule from the early 1990s. Mauve carpet, brass fixtures, a reception desk with a computer monitor that belonged in a museum. And impossibly, hauntingly, it was warm inside. Not just heated, but lived-in warm, as if someone had recently walked through these halls. Emergency lighting cast red shadows across the space, just enough illumination to navigate without a flashlight. A directory on the wall listed departments: gynecology, family planning services, surgical suite, recovery. Normal enough, except for the bottom entry written in different ink: special procedures, basement level. Darren's phone chimed with a text notification, the sound sharp and intrusive in the silence. The message was from an unknown number. "Welcome, Mr. Holt. Please begin with the second floor. The answers you seek require proper preparation." His blood went cold. No one knew he was here. He'd told no one about tonight's investigation, had even left his usual filming. Partner, Marcus, behind after their argument about taking unnecessary risks. But as he stared at the message, a new text appeared. "Your panic attacks began after your sister's death. Medical trauma runs in families, Darren. Tonight you'll understand why." The phone slipped from his numb fingers, clattering on the tile floor. How could anyone know about Sarah? About the hospital, the machines, the way she'd looked so small in that bed while the doctors explained in clinical terms why a routine procedure had gone wrong. He'd never mentioned her in any of his videos, had barely spoken her name aloud in the 5 years since the funeral. A sound echoed from somewhere above, not quite footsteps, but a rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming against wood. Darren forced himself to pick up his phone, hands trembling as he aimed the camera at his own face. "Something's happening here that I don't understand," he whispered. "Someone knows I'm here. They know things about me. But I'm not leaving. Sarah deserves the truth, even if I'm too late to save her." The elevator at the far end of the lobby stood open, its brass interior gleaming despite decades of abandonment. The button panel showed 3 floors: ground, second, and basement. As Darren approached, the second floor button began to glow with a soft amber light. "Your panic attacks began after your sister's death." He stepped into the elevator, and the doors closed behind him with the finality of a coffin lid. Chapter 2. The Code Book. The second-floor hallway stretched in both directions from the elevator, lined with doors bearing frosted glass panels etched with room numbers. The carpet here was different, industrial blue with dark stains that might have been water damage or something worse. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead in an irregular rhythm that made shadows dance and twist. Darren's breathing had steadied somewhat, the familiar weight of his camera providing comfort. This was what he did: document the abandoned, the forgotten, the places where tragedy had left its mark. But tonight felt different, personal in a way that made his skin crawl. He chose to go right first, past doors marked 2A through 2F. Most were locked, but 2D stood slightly ajar. Through the gap he could see what had once been an examination room, a padded table with stirrups, a rolling stool, medical cabinets with glass fronts. Everything was clean, organized, waiting, as if Dr. Valentino had just stepped out and might return any moment. A manila folder lay open on the examination table. Inside were patient files, but not the kind Darren expected. Instead of names, each page bore only initials and dates, followed by cryptic notations. KM, March 15th, 1992. Code 7. Complications during termination. Heart rate anomaly at 1432. Patient survived. Containment necessary. RJ, March 22nd, 1992. Code 7. Subject exhibited unusual resistance to sedation. Procedure incomplete. Second attempt scheduled. LH, March 28, 1992, Code 7. Successful termination. No complications. Patient discharge, basement storage. The dates made Darren's stomach turn. These were from the final month before Dr. Valentino's disappearance. But what was Code 7, and why were the last entries so clinical, so devoid of humanity? A keypad beside the medical cabinets caught his attention. Its digital display showed enter code in red letters. Darren tried several combinations: the date of Valentino's disappearance, the clinic's supposed opening year, but nothing worked. Then he noticed something scratched into the wall beside the keypad, so faint it was barely visible. LH was my friend. She came to me for help. I couldn't save her, but I recorded everything. Of Amanda Valentino, the doctor's daughter. Darren remembered her from his research, a nursing student who'd worked at the clinic and disappeared the same night as her father. Most reports assumed she'd fled with him, but these notes suggested something different. He tried entering LH's date from the file, March 28, 1992. The keypad beeped, and the cabinet doors clicked open. Inside, among outdated medical supplies and pharmaceutical bottles, was a small digital recorder with a note taped to it. "Play me alone. Trust no one else." Darren pocketed the recorder and moved to the next room. 2E was identical to the first, but the patient files here told a different story. MS, April 2nd, 1992. Code 7. Patient terminated successfully. Unusual fetal development noted. Sample preserved for study. JT, April 5th, 1992. Code 7. Complications. Patient did not survive procedure. Father requesting remains. Denied. CK, April 9th, 1992. Code 7. Patient conscious during procedure despite adequate sedation. Claims she could hear them crying. Psychological evaluation recommended. Instead, proceed to basement storage. April 1992. But according to every report Darren had found, the clinic closed in March after Valentino's disappearance. These files suggested operations continued for weeks afterward. But who was performing the procedures? The keypad in this room required a different code. Scratched beside it was another message. CK fought back. She knew what father was really doing. Darren entered CK's date, and the cabinet opened to reveal more supplies and another recorder, this one labeled, "Listen after you find the basement key." Room 2F was locked, but 2 grams stood wide open. The examination table here was different, longer, with restraints at the wrists and ankles. Dark stains covered the padding, and the floor beneath was scratched and gouged, as if someone had clawed at it desperately. The patient file on this table contained only one entry, AV, April 15, 1992, Code 7. Cannot proceed. She is my daughter, but father insists, claims she has seen too much. Code 7 must be maintained. Forgive me. The writing changed at the bottom, becoming shaky and uncertain. I won't let him do this to me. I know what Code 7 really means. I know what happened to those babies. They're not dead. They're waiting. And if I complete the procedure on myself, I can join them. I can make this right. The basement key is in room 3B. But don't go there after midnight. Once the witching hour passes, they wake up. Darren's hands shook as he read the entry. According to his phone, it was 12:43 a.m. He'd already missed the deadline. A sound echoed through the hallway, the soft whisper of elevator doors opening. Footsteps followed, slow and measured, moving in his direction. Darren killed his flashlight and pressed himself against the wall of 2 grams. Heart hammering so hard he was sure whoever was coming would hear it. The footsteps stopped directly outside the room. Through the frosted glass, Darren could see a silhouette, tall, thin, wearing what looked like surgical scrubs. The figure stood motionless for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then a voice, muffled by the glass but unmistakably female. You're reading my files, aren't you, Darren? Learning about Code 7? It was impossible. Amanda Valentino had been missing for over 30 years. But the voice continued, conversational and terrifyingly calm. Father thought he was helping them, ending their suffering before it began. But he was wrong, dead wrong. They don't suffer when they die. They wait, they grow, and eventually... The silhouette moved closer to the glass. They come back to finish what was started. Darren forced himself to breathe silently, camera still rolling in his trembling hands. The figure remained motionless for another long moment, then spoke again. Room 3B, Darren. You need the key. But remember what I wrote. After midnight, they wake up. And it's already past midnight. The footsteps retreated, and the elevator doors whispered shut. Darren waited 10 minutes before moving, legs weak and unsteady. When he finally peered into the hallway, it was empty except for the flickering fluorescent lights. The recorder in his pocket felt heavier than it should. He pulled it out and pressed play. Amanda's voice filled the empty room. Young and frightened but determined, this is day 15 of what Father calls the special program. I can't keep calling it that. I know what it really is now. The women who come here, they think they're getting normal procedures, terminations. But Father is experimenting. He's keeping the tissue samples, trying to... I don't know how to say this without sounding insane. Static crackled. Then her voice returned. They're still alive. Not alive like you and me, but aware, conscious. He's created something that shouldn't exist, and now he wants to expand the program. He says if we can keep them suspended between life and death, we can study human consciousness itself, learn what happens after we die. A longer pause then. I tried to destroy the samples last night. They screamed when I opened the preservation units, not with voices, but I felt it in my head. Pure terror and rage. They know what was done to them, and they want revenge. The recording ended with Amanda sobbing. Darren looked at his camera, trying to process what he'd heard. Part of him wanted to leave, to run back to his car and drive until the sun came up. But Sarah's face filled his mind, pale and still in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines that couldn't save her. She'd died because of medical negligence, a routine surgery gone wrong. How many others had died because of doctors who played God? Room 3B was at the far end of the hall, past a section where several ceiling tiles had fallen and exposed twisted metal ductwork. The door was reinforced steel instead of wood, with multiple deadbolts, and a warning sign, authorized personnel only, biological hazard. But it wasn't locked. In fact, it stood slightly ajar, revealing only darkness beyond. Darren checked his phone, 1:15 a.m., well past midnight, well into whatever window Amanda had warned against. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. Chapter 3. The message room 3B wasn't a patient room. It was an office, cramped and cluttered with filing cabinets, medical, texts, and scientific equipment that looked decades ahead of its time. But what dominated the space was a massive desk covered with journals, photographs, and what appeared to be architectural blueprints of the clinic. The photographs made Darren's stomach lurch. They showed fetal tissue in various stages of development, but something was wrong with the images. The tissue seemed to move between shots as if it were alive and struggling. Worse, some of the later photographs showed the samples in glass containers, and their positions had clearly changed between each shot. Dr. Valentino's journal lay open to an entry dated April 10, 1990. 2. The specimens continue to exhibit unprecedented neural activity. Traditional medical science would classify them as dead tissue, but the electrical patterns we're recording suggest otherwise. They appear to be experiencing some form of consciousness, primitive perhaps, but undeniably present. Amanda grows more resistant to the research. She doesn't understand the implications of what we've discovered. If we can isolate the mechanism that allows consciousness to persist, after biological death, we could revolutionize medicine itself. Death would become merely another treatable condition. But the specimens are becoming more active. They've begun responding to external stimuli and yesterday's electromagnetic. Reading suggests they may be attempting communication. Darren flipped to the final entry, dated April 15, 1992. Amanda has betrayed the research. She attempted to destroy 17 specimens last night, and several others have gone missing from the storage facility. Worse, she claims the specimens spoke to her during the attempted destruction. I cannot allow 30 years of research to be compromised by her emotional weakness. Code 7 must be implemented on Amanda herself. Once she joins the other specimens, she will understand the gift we're giving them. Consciousness without the limitations of a traditional biological form. The basement storage has been prepared. The procedure will take place at midnight. But below this, in different handwriting, Amanda's, based on the style from the patient files, I won't let him do this to me. I know what Code 7 really means now. It's not preservation of consciousness, it's imprisonment, trapping souls in dying tissue and keeping them aware of every moment of decay. I've hidden the key to the basement storage, and I've sabotaged the main preservation units. When the power fails, they'll be free, all of them, and Father will have to face what he's created. If someone finds this, know that we tried to stop him. But some sins echo across generations. The children are angry, and they're growing stronger. Taped to the final page was a small brass key and another note: the basement door is behind the surgical suite. But please, whoever you are, don't go down there unless you're prepared to finish what I started. Darren pocketed the key, hands trembling. The second recorder he'd found was also labeled 4 after finding the key. He pressed play, Amanda's voice, but different this time. Older, more strained, as, if recorded much later, if you're hearing this, then you found Father's research. And you probably think I'm dead or missing. I'm not. I'm still here, still watching, still trying to make this right. Static filled the room. Then her voice continued. I didn't die that night in April. I hid. But Father found me 3 days later. And he convinced me that the only way to stop the specimens from suffering was to join them, to help them from the inside. A long pause, filled with what sounded like distant crying. I've been in the basement for 30 years. Not alive, not dead. Conscious. Aware of every moment, every day, every year. And I'm not alone. There are 17 others down there. 17 children who were supposed to die but didn't. 17 souls trapped between worlds because my father couldn't accept the natural order. Her voice grew stronger, more determined, but we've learned things in all these years. How to influence the physical world. How to draw people here who might be able to help. You came here because we called you, Darren. Because your sister's death left you with the same questions Father had. What happens when we die? Where do we go? The recording crackled with interference. Then Amanda's voice returned, urgent. The preservation units are failing. They were supposed to last decades, but my sabotage works slower than I hoped. When they shut down completely, we'll be free to move on. But Father's spirit is still here too. He won't let us go easily. He still believes his research can be completed. You need to choose, Darren. Help us finish dying properly, or become part of the research. But choose quickly. The units will fail within the hour, and when they do, this building will become something else entirely. Something hungry. The recording ended with what sounded like machinery winding down. Darren looked around the office, noting details he'd missed before. The medical equipment wasn't just advanced for 1992, it was impossible for 1992. Quantum processors, neural interface devices, consciousness mapping arrays, technologies that shouldn't have existed for decades. but they were all connected to a central monitoring station showing 17 separate life signs, 17 specimens, each with its own readout showing brain activity, neural patterns, and something labeled consciousness integrity. And as Darren watched, one of the readouts flickered and went dark. Then another. The preservation units were failing. A new sound echoed through the building, not footsteps or machinery, but something that might have been singing. A child's voice, soft and mournful, drifting up from somewhere far below. The lullaby was one Darren recognized from his own childhood, one Sarah used to hum when she couldn't sleep. The voice was joined by another, then another, until a chorus of children's voices filled the air with their sad, sweet song. And as they sang, the lights in the room began to dim, as if the building's power was being drawn elsewhere. Darren's phone buzzed with another message. "Time to go downstairs, Darren. The children want to meet you, and Father is waiting." But this message wasn't from an unknown number. According to the display, it came from Sarah's old phone, the one buried with her 5 years ago. Chapter 4. The Heartbeat Room. The surgical suite occupied most of the ground floor's east wing, accessible through doors marked authorized personnel only in faded red letters. Unlike the rest of the building, this area showed signs of recent use, surgical instruments arranged on sterile trays, monitoring, equipment that hummed with electronic life, and an operating table positioned beneath powerful overhead lights. But it was the sound that made Darren pause at the threshold, a rhythmic beeping that echoed through the space like a heartbeat. Slow, steady, impossibly loud. Each pulse seemed to sync with his own heartbeat, until he couldn't tell where the machine ended and his body began. The main operating room doors stood open, revealing a space that shouldn't exist. The room was larger than the building's exterior dimensions allowed, stretching back into shadows that his flashlight couldn't penetrate. Banks of monitoring equipment lined the walls, their screens showing waveforms and vital signs that pulsed in perfect synchronization with the omnipresent beeping. But it was what lay on the operating table that made Darren's breath catch in his throat. A figure in surgical scrubs lay perfectly still beneath the bright lights. Not dead, not sleeping, but suspended somewhere between states. The chest rose and fell with mechanical regularity, and the monitors showed steady vital signs, but the eyes were open and aware, tracking Darren's movement with an intelligence that was painfully human. As he approached, the figure's features became clear. Dr. Robert Valentino, unchanged. By 30 years, locked in the same twilight state he'd inflicted on his victims. "Hello, Mr. Holt." The figure spoke without moving its lips, the voice emanating from speakers hidden throughout the room. "I've been waiting for you. We need to complete the procedure." Darren raised his camera, hands steadier now that he was facing something concrete. "Dr. Valentino, I presume. You've been down here for 30 years? Not down here. Everywhere. Nowhere. Suspended between life and death, just like my specimens. But unlike them, I chose this state. I needed to continue the research, to perfect the process. Death is merely another disease to be cured." The monitors around the room flickered, and Darren realized they weren't showing Valentino's vital signs. They were showing the specimens in the basement, 17 separate readouts tracking 17 trapped souls. And as he watched, another flatlined, then another. "The preservation units are failing," Valentino's voice continued, tinged with what might have been panic. 30 years of research, lost because my daughter couldn't understand the greater good. "But you can help me, Mr. Holt. Your sister's death left you with questions. I can provide answers." "Sarah died because of medical negligence," Darren said, though his voice wavered. "Because doctors make mistakes. Sarah died because death is a limitation we've accepted too readily. But what if I told you she doesn't have to stay dead? What if consciousness could be preserved, studied, eventually transferred back into living tissue? Your sister could live again, Mr. Holt. She could have the life that was stolen from her." The room grew colder, and Darren could see his breath in small puffs of vapor. The heartbeat sound grew louder, more insistent, until it felt like pressure against his eardrums. "The specimens in the basement," Darren managed to say. "They're children. You kept them conscious while they died." "They're the future," Valentino replied, each one a step closer to understanding the mechanism of consciousness itself. "Their sacrifice will benefit all of humanity. Death will become optional." One of the monitors showed a readout labeled S. As Darren watched, the vital signs fluctuated wildly before steadying into a pattern he recognized, Sarah's EKG from her final days in the hospital, the same irregular rhythm that had preceded her death. "Impossible," he whispered. "Nothing is impossible, Mr. Holt. Only unimaginable until achieved." Your sister's consciousness pattern was recorded during her final moments. Standard medical procedure in cases of unexpected death. That data was acquired for our research. She's been with us for 5 years now, waiting for you to find her." The ESH monitor flickered, and Sarah's voice emerged from the speakers, weak and confused. "Darren, is that you? I can't see anything. It's so cold here. Please help me." Darren dropped to his knees, camera clattering on the tile floor. Hearing Sarah's voice, even distorted through decades-old equipment, unleashed every suppressed emotion from the night she died. The helplessness, the rage, the crushing guilt that he hadn't been there when she needed him most. "She's been calling for you," Valentino continued. "All of them have been calling for their families. But only you responded, Mr. Holt. Only you were willing to look past conventional wisdom and seek the truth." "This isn't truth," Darren said, forcing himself to stand. "This is torture. You're keeping them trapped, aware of their own death. Temporarily, until the transfer process can be perfected, but the preservation units are failing faster than anticipated. We need to act quickly." Another monitor flatlined, then another. The basement specimens were dying, truly dying, as their artificial life support systems shut down. But instead of bringing peace, each death seemed to make the building itself more unstable. The lights flickered more violently, the heartbeat sound became irregular, and the temperature continued to drop. "The building is connected to them," Darren realized. "It's feeding off their consciousness somehow." "The building is them," Valentino corrected. "Consciousness without biological form requires a physical anchor. The clinic itself has become a vessel for their collective awareness. When they die, the anchor will break. The building will collapse, and 30 years of research will be lost forever." Through the speakers, Sarah's voice grew more desperate. "Darren, please. I remember dying. I remember everything. Make it stop. Please make it stop." More voices joined hers, children's voices, all pleading for release from their suspended state. The chorus grew until it was nearly deafening, a cacophony of trapped souls begging for the peace they'd been denied for decades. "The basement key," Valentino said urgently. "Use it to access the primary preservation system. You can stabilize the units. Give me time to complete the transfer process. Your sister can live again, Mr. Holt. All of them can have new bodies, new lives. Or I can let them die properly," Darren said. "Let them move on to whatever comes next." The room shook as another preservation unit failed. Cracks appeared in the walls and dust rained from the ceiling. The building was indeed collapsing as its anchors to consciousness severed one by one. "Choose quickly," Valentino said. "Save the research or doom your sister to true death, but remember, once she's gone forever. No heaven, no afterlife, just the void that terrifies every human being who's ever drawn breath." Through the speakers, Sarah's voice whispered one final plea. "I trust you, Darren. Whatever you choose, I trust you." The basement door stood at the back of the surgical suite, hidden behind a curtain of heavy plastic sheeting. The brass key felt hot in Darren's palm as he approached, the building shaking more violently with each failed preservation unit. He had to choose, preserve the research and keep the souls trapped, but conscious, or let them die, and face the uncertainty of true death. Behind him, the monitors continued to flatline one by one, each death bringing the building closer to collapse. Chapter 5, The Echo Patient. The basement stairway descended into darkness so complete that Darren's flashlight beams seemed to be absorbed rather than reflected. The walls were older here, rough stone instead of modern drywall, and they wept with moisture that had no obvious source. The temperature had dropped below freezing, turning his breath into thick clouds that hung in the still air. Each step echoed with a hollow sound that returned as distorted whispers, as if the building itself were repeating his movements in a language he couldn't understand. By the time he reached the bottom 17 steps down, his phone showed 12 missed calls from Sarah's number and a string of text messages. "Don't come down here, he's lying about everything. The transfer process doesn't work. It makes things worse. Please, Darren, turn back the basement." Corridors stretched in both directions, lined with metal doors marked only with numbers. A central monitoring station showed the status of the preservation units, and Darren watched. In real time as Unit 7 flickered from stable to critical to terminated. The moment it flatlined one of the metal doors, door 7, swung open with a grinding shriek. Cold air rushed from the open doorway, carrying with it the sound of a child crying. Not the mechanical reproduction from the speakers upstairs, but something immediate and heartbreakingly real. Darren approached the doorway and aimed his flashlight inside. The room was small, sterile, containing only a glass cylinder filled with pale fluid. The preservation unit that had held Specimen 7 was now empty, its contents gone. But floating in the empty fluid were wisps of light, not quite solid, not quite gone, that pulsed with the rhythm of a frightened heartbeat. She was only 6 weeks, a voice said behind him. Darren spun around to find a woman in surgical scrubs standing in the corridor. Amanda Valentino, looking exactly as she had in 1992, but translucent, like a photograph exposed to too much light. Amanda? I've been waiting so long for someone to come, someone who might understand what Father really did here. She gestured toward the empty preservation unit. Jenny Martinez. She was 17, scared, thought she was getting a simple procedure to end an unwanted pregnancy. Instead, Father preserved her child's consciousness at the moment of termination. The wisps of light in the empty cylinder pulsed brighter, and Darren could swear he heard something that might have been laughter, a child's innocent joy at finally being free. They're not suffering now, Amanda continued. They're free to move on. But Father, she looked toward the ceiling, toward the operating room where Valentino's body still lay suspended. Father convinced them that death was something to be feared, that consciousness was something to be hoarded rather than released. More doors were opening now as preservation units failed. Door 3, door 12, door 15. From each came the same wisps of light, the same sense of release and joy. But they were also accompanied by something else, a growing instability in the building's foundation. Without the consciousness anchoring the structure, the clinic was becoming untethered from reality itself. The building will collapse, Darren said. The building will return to what it was before Father turned it into a prison. Empty, abandoned. Just another forgotten place where tragedy occurred. Amanda moved closer, and Darren could feel the cold radiating from her form. But you have a choice to make. About your sister. She led him deeper into the basement, past more opening doors, to a corridor he hadn't seen before. At the end stood a door marked Special Research, S.H. Sarah's door. Father didn't just preserve the specimens from his procedures, Amanda explained. He collected consciousness data from hospitals across the region. Any unexpected death, any medical mystery, any case where the family asked too many questions. He told them it was for research, for preventing future tragedies. But really, he was building a library of trapped souls. Sarah's door was different from the others. Newer, with electronic locks and monitoring equipment that hummed with power. Through a small window, Darren could see a preservation unit that was larger, more sophisticated than the others. And floating inside, Sarah, he whispered. His sister's consciousness writhed in the pale fluid, no longer human-shaped, but recognizable by something indefinable, the essence that had made her her. She pulsed with agitation, awareness, and unmistakable fear. She's been trying to reach you for 5 years, Amanda said. Every investigator who's looked into medical malpractice cases has felt her influence. She guided you here, Darren. She wants to be free. The electronic lock showed a keypad requiring a 6-digit code, but scratched into the metal beside it, almost invisible unless you knew to look, were numbers 052,018, May 20th, 2018. The date Sarah died. Darren entered the code, and the door clicked open. The preservation chamber was more complex than the others, with multiple monitoring systems and what appeared to be experimental equipment. But Sarah's consciousness moved with purpose now, pressing against the glass as if she could sense his presence. The transfer process, Darren said. Valentino claimed he could give her a new body. Amanda's expression grew sad. Father has been trying to perfect the transfer for 30 years. He's attempted it 17 times with 17 different specimens. Every attempt has failed. The consciousness survives the transfer, but it becomes wrong, corrupted, neither alive nor dead, but something hungry and desperate. As if summoned by her words, movement stirred in the shadows at the far end of the basement. 17 forms shambled into view, human-shaped but fundamentally wrong, their bodies a patchwork of preserved tissue and mechanical components. The failed transfers, still conscious, still aware of their twisted existence. "Help us," they whispered in unison, voices wet and broken. "Please help us die." The preservation unit holding Sarah's consciousness began to spark and smoke. The power failure was spreading, and soon her unit would fail like all the others. But unlike the other specimens, Sarah had been trapped for only 5 years instead of 30. Her consciousness was stronger, more coherent, and as the fluid began to drain from her chamber, she began to take shape. Not physical form, something more fundamental, a presence that filled the room with warmth despite the frigid air. For a moment, Darren could see her clearly, 24 years old again, healthy and whole, the the way she'd looked before the surgery that killed her. "Darren," her voice came not from speakers but from the air itself. "I've been so scared, so alone, but I remember now. I remember what comes after. After what? After letting go." Sarah's form flickered like candlelight. "There's something beyond this, beyond the fear and the pain. Father was wrong. Death isn't an ending to be prevented. It's a door to be opened." The failed transfers pressed closer, their mechanical voices growing more desperate. "Show us how. Please show us how to open the door." Amanda stepped between them and Darren. They can't cross over while Father's research continues. His consciousness is still anchored here, still fighting to maintain the prison he built. But if someone were to shut down the primary preservation system, she gestured toward a massive control panel at the center of the basement, banks of switches, monitors showing each specimen's status, and at the center, a large red button marked emergency termination. All units. "It would free everyone," Darren said, "including Father. His consciousness would be released too, but without the research to anchor him, he'd have no choice but to move on." Amanda's form was growing fainter as more units failed. "But there's a cost. The building won't survive the complete system shutdown. The basement will collapse first, then the upper floors. You'd have maybe 5 minutes to escape." Sarah's consciousness pulsed brighter. "I'm not afraid anymore, Darren. I can see it now. The door, the light beyond it. It's beautiful. But I can't go through while the others are still trapped." The failed transfers shambled closer, their desperate pleas growing louder. Behind them, in the shadows, more forms moved. Older specimens, their consciousness, so degraded by decades of imprisonment that they could barely maintain cohesion. All of them waiting for release. Darren looked at the emergency termination button, then at his sister's fading form. "If I do this, you'll really be gone? Forever." "I'll be where I should have been 5 years ago," Sarah replied. "At peace, moving forward instead of being trapped in one terrible moment." Her form smiled, and for an instant she looked exactly as she had when they were children, gap-toothed and fearless. "And maybe I'll be waiting for you when it's your turn. But not for a long time, okay? You have life to live first." From the operating room above came a sound of rage, Dr. Valentino's consciousness, fighting to maintain its hold on the building as its anchors failed one by one. The ceiling shook and chunks of concrete began to fall. "Choose now," Amanda said urgently, "before the building makes the choice for us." Darren placed his hand on the emergency termination button. Around him, 18 trapped souls, 17 specimens, and Amanda herself watched with expressions of hope and desperate gratitude. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, "for finding me, for not giving up." Darren pressed the button. Chapter 6. The basement the emergency termination sent a cascade of electrical death through every preservation unit in the basement. Alarms shrieked as monitors flatlined in rapid succession, their screens going dark one by one. But instead of the anguished cries Darren expected, the basement filled with something else entirely: relief. The wisps of consciousness that had been trapped in failing machinery began to coalesce, taking on the shapes they'd worn in life: children, teenagers, young adults, all of them glowing with soft inner light. They moved towards something Darren couldn't see, as if drawn by an irresistible force. One by one, they stepped forward and simply weren't. Not destroyed, not extinguished, but somewhere else, somewhere better. Sarah was among the last to go. She paused beside Darren, her form so bright now that looking at her was like staring into sunlight. "I love you," she said, and her voice carried the warmth of every childhood memory. Every shared joke, every moment of sibling love that death had tried to steal. "But this isn't goodbye. This is just, see you later." She stepped forward and vanished into whatever light awaited beyond death's door. But even as the specimens found their peace, the building's death throes grew more violent. Dr. Valentino's consciousness, no longer anchored by his research, raged through the structure like a hurricane. His voice echoed from every speaker, every piece of electronic equipment. "You don't understand what you've done. 30 years of research, the cure for death itself. Your sister could have lived forever." The basement ceiling cracked, sending chunks of concrete crashing down. Emergency lighting failed, plunging the space into darkness broken only by sparking electrical equipment. Darren ran for the stairs, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly as the building shook apart around him. "She chose freedom over forever," he shouted back, though he doubted Valentino could hear him over the sound of collapsing infrastructure. They all did. The stairway tilted at an impossible angle as the building's foundation gave way. Darren grabbed the handrail and pulled himself upward, step by agonizing step, as the basement filled with debris behind him. The 17 failed transfers had vanished along with the specimens, freed by the termination to finally truly die. The ground floor was chaos. Every piece of medical equipment sparked and smoked as Valentino's. Consciousness fought to maintain some hold on the physical world. In the surgical suite, his body convulsed on the operating table, vital signs, spiking wildly as his trapped soul faced the reality of true death. "I won't go." His voice shrieked from speakers that were beginning to melt from electrical overload. "I have too much work to finish, too many lives to save." But even as he raged, Darren could see his form beginning to fade. Without the prison he'd built, without the trapped consciousness to anchor him, Valentino was subject to the same laws as everyone else. Death would claim him whether he accepted it or not. The building groaned and tilted as its foundation collapsed entirely. Darren stumbled through the lobby, past the reception desk that was, now buried under fallen ceiling tiles, toward the front entrance. The glass doors had shattered, opening onto the night air that had never felt more precious. Behind him, Dr. Valentino's voice grew weaker, more distant. The research must continue. Death is just another disease. Then silence. Darren burst through the doorway and kept running until he reached his car, hands shaking as he fumbled with the keys. The engine started on the third try, and he floored the accelerator, tires spraying gravel as he sped away from the collapsing clinic. In his rearview mirror, he watched the Valentino clinic fold in on itself like a house of cards. The 2-story structure compressed into a single-story heap, then into a pile of rubble, then into nothing more than a depression in the earth surrounded by pine trees, as if it had never existed at all. Only when he'd driven 5 miles and could no longer see the site did Darren pull over and check his phone. The dozens of messages from Sarah's number had vanished. His call log showed no record of them ever existing. Even the anonymous email that had brought him here was gone from his inbox. But the footage on his camera remained, hours of documentation showing the clinic, the patient files, the basement laboratory, and the final moments of 18 trapped souls finding their freedom. Evidence that Dr. Robert Valentino had committed crimes against nature, itself, and that sometimes the only way to heal trauma was to let it go. Darren drove through the night toward home, toward his apartment, toward the life he still had to live. In the distance, dawn was breaking over the New Hampshire mountains, painting the sky in shades of hope he hadn't seen since Sarah died. His phone chimed with a single text message, this one from his own number. Impossible, since the phone was in his hand. But when he looked at the screen, the message was clear. "Thank you." The message deleted itself a moment later, leaving no trace it had ever existed. But Darren smiled anyway, because some things didn't need evidence to be true. Some things just were. Sarah was free. They were all free. And sometimes that was the only miracle anyone really needed. Epilogue. 6 months later, Holt Investigations uploaded a video titled The Valentino Clinic, a True Horror Story. It became Darren's most watched content, generating millions of views and thousands of comments from people sharing their own experiences with medical trauma and loss. But what surprised Darren most were the messages from other investigators, urban explorers, paranormal researchers, journalists, who claimed they'd received anonymous tips directing them to similar facilities, hidden clinics, abandoned research hospitals, forgotten places where doctors had crossed ethical lines in pursuit of scientific advancement. One by one, these places were being exposed. One by one, the victims trapped within them were finding their freedom. Darren liked to think Sarah was still out there somewhere, still guiding people toward the truth, still helping others find their way from imprisonment to peace, from fear to freedom, from the artificial forever that some people promised to the natural release that everyone deserved. He kept investigating, kept documenting, kept telling the stories that needed to be told, but he never again received an anonymous tip that knew his personal history. Some investigations, it seemed, were too personal to delegate. Late at night, when panic attacks threatened to overwhelm him, Darren would remember Sarah's final words, "See you later," not goodbye, just a promise that death wasn't an ending but a transition, and that love didn't disappear just because bodies did. The Valentino Clinic was gone, erased from maps and memory as if it had never existed. But the lesson it taught remained. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is let them go, even when letting go is the hardest thing in the world. In the end.